By now, even if you're living under a rock in the furthest reaches of the United States of America, you should have already heard about this story. And if you haven't, well, let's take a brief recap. A couple NYPD cops were apparently assaulted by a group of illegal immigrants. What led to it is anyone's guess. I don't think there has been a clear statement regarding what led to the situation. Now, it's actually no off my back. I mean, as a New Yorker myself, I know a lot about the NYPD, right? And the things that they've been involved in over the years. But before you shed any crocodile tears, let's get into it. So, they were assaulted. The perps were arrested, but then released somehow with no bail, right? Now, let me just say, had it been a group of black men that had done this, I think it would have went very, very differently. That's just my opinion. And being from the city, I do know that, you know, the possibility, more than likely, the outcome would have been very different. Yes, maybe they wouldn't have been shot on site. They would have been taken in for processing. But yeah, they would have got theirs, without a doubt. The NYPD is actually very notorious for this, among other PDs, not just them. But let's take a look. Now, what you're looking at on screen is just a brief summary of the NYPD, which has been fraught with corruption over the years. As it reads, throughout the history of the New York City Police Department, numerous instances of corruption, misconduct, and other allegations of such have occurred. Over 12,000 cases have resulted in lawsuit settlements totaling over 400 million during a 5-year period ending in 2014. Now, this is just one of several. There are actually documentaries on corruption in the NYPD. And as I said, it's not the only one. It's any PD. Why? Because these are all just people, right? They're all just men and women tasked with, making society compliant at the end of the day. Do you need them in certain situations, especially with the kind of strict gun laws and things of this nature? Yes, probably you do, because there are times when, you know, you might need an officer around if, things go sideways, right? But notwithstanding that, it is a fact that these police departments have been fraught with corruption, all sorts of violations of people's rights, their privacy, no knock warrants that led to the death of the wrong person, right? Mistaken identity. And, it's been a hard thing for me to just think about what the families of these people have went through, right? To have somebody murdered in cold blood by a cop, mistaken identity. Now, the most obvious one that comes to mind is, to me, the first time in my life when I said for sure that, yeah, this department isn't right. And the people in the higher up positions, you can't trust them. Let me show you what I mean. How many of you are familiar with this face on the screen? Now, this is the mother of Amadou Diallo, right? He was shot and killed by police some 25 years ago. Actually, 4 days ago on February 4th, 2024, would make it 25 years. Right? Now, this was the first time I said to myself that, there had been instances before, things I'd seen, things I had heard from other people about, police stop and frisk and all these different things. It happened to me as well, to stop and frisk, be driving while black, all that stuff. But to have somebody taken out in such a brutal manner, I had not heard it, in my roughly, 20 years at that time. Well, let's take a listen of how that went.
Diallo was just 22 when his life was cut short by a hail of NYPD bullets. Officials say 41 shots were fired by plainclothes officers outside of his Bronx apartment building back on February 4th, 1999. 19 of those bullets piercing him.
I thought my life was ending. I didn't think I would recover.
On that fateful day, the officers, who were part of a street crimes unit, mistook him for an armed rape suspect. It was one of the first police-involved shootings in New York City that sparked national outrage and conversations about race and police relations. New York City streets were flooded with protesters.
When Amadou was killed, it raised the consciousness of humanity.
How have you managed to survive?
My faith, my family, my community.
Diallo's mother turned her sadness into strength, giving her son a voice. She says he was much more than a street vendor from Africa.
Amadou was a young, hardworking young man who grew up in many different countries in Africa, and he spoke 5 languages. He went to college in Thailand, to the French International School. He graduated, then he went to Singapore to have his computer degree.
The officers involved were charged with second-degree murder, but were acquitted at trial. The Diallo family sued the city, and a $3 million settlement was reached.
Okay, so obviously the short summary that I read might include this number since it happened in 99. But as I said, this is just one of many cases, right? There was Sean Bell, Eric Garner, many others. So, it's not a stretch of the imagination to say that if, some people were hostile towards the NYPD, that the result would most likely be these people taken out, or at the very least being arrested, taken into custody, and they would not be getting any bail, not walking out with no bail. They would be denied any sort of bond. That is my experience with the NYPD, right? And as I said, the corruption has been for years and years. I don't know how many of you have heard about this documentary, but it's about the 75th precinct, or 75 precinct in East New York, Brooklyn, right? This is the plot, and I'll read it out to you so you have, no issue understanding why I bring it up at this point. In 1980s, Brooklyn, New York was suffering from a crack epidemic. Everybody should know that. Michael Dowd worked in the NYPD's 75th precinct in East New York neighborhood of Brooklyn, which was considered to be one of the most dangerous precincts in the United States at the time. 75th precinct had one of the highest murder rates in the country during the late 80s. Dowd describes being underappreciated for the amount of work he put in and hurting for money as the reasons for taking money from drug dealers. He initially began taking bribes from drug dealers on the streets before moving on to protecting a drug cartel leader and robbing other drug dealers at gunpoint. Dowd and his then partner Henry Chica Guevara recount the first time walking into a domestic dispute in an apartment and seeing bags of marijuana, a duffel bag filled with approximately 20 grand in cash and 2 guns. Dowd communicated that he and his partner would take 8 grand from the duffel bag and both guns. Dowd continued to rob drug dealers for thousands of dollars. Guevara resigned shortly after multiple police officers were arrested in the 77th precinct for corruption-related offenses. So even if they're talking about the 75, it also happened in the 77th and others, right? You would be hard pressed to be in New York City and see a cop who's been on the job for a little while pull up to the job in a crappy looking car, right? I know of cops myself, not really closely, but from a distance. They have new vehicles. Their wife has a new vehicle. They seem to be doing pretty well. I don't know that the NYPD pays that well. Are they involved in corruption? I don't know. I can't say. I don't want to paint everybody with a broad brush. But it is well known that the NYPD has been fraught with corruption over the years. And I say that to say this. I don't know how this whole scenario unfolded. It feels to me like it was constructed to come out the way it did. Is that a true statement? I have no real idea of knowing. But it is just very uncanny that something like this could be allowed to happen in New York City. I mean, regardless of how liberal the leaders like Hochul and Eric Adams may be, the NYPD has always been very brazen, right, in their dealing with the populace. And I don't think the fact that somebody is an illegal immigrant would preclude them from doing that, right? I don't think being an illegal immigrant would put you on some sort of exclusionary list for the wrath of the NYPD. Now, that being said, maybe it might have happened organically. Who knows? I don't know how it all went down. What I do know is that in any situation where a person's rights have been violated, I'm talking about just their natural rights as a human being, as a man, as a woman, it should not be tolerated under any circumstances. But as I said, these police officers are also mere people. They're capable of the same evils that everyone else is capable of. Corruption, taking bribes, accepting sexual favors, coercion, right? False testimony, lying under oath, all these things. They're also capable of it. So, that's why when I see people talking about, they back the blue. No, you have to back the truth. You have to go with, what's right. You cannot back an institution or a set of people just because they are so-called law enforcement. If what they did was right, it was just, okay, 100%. If what they did was in opposition to being right and just, then no, you can't back them. And that's my take on it. So, as I said, I think personally, had it been a different set of people that got into it with the NYPD, the results would have been different. But still, there's this strange suspicion that this was not organic. I don't know. It just feels weird. Feels very weird. I don't know what's the end game, but I guess we'll see in due time. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Of course, like the video, share the video, drop me a comment, and I'll see you next time. Peace.